Good afternoon, Facebook friends. A good Sabbath. Happy Sunday. Happy day of worship. You know, this morning at worship online, Wendy announced the 66 books in 66 days. And she asked the congregation and myself how many days we had to go. And I can't do math that quickly, so I just shouted out a lot because I know that we're still early in this study of 66 books in 66 days. But when I said a lot, I just want you all to know that I am really enjoying these studies together, and I hope that you are too. We've tried a lot of different ways to study the Bible, these overviews. We've done it through live stream, we've done it recorded, we've done question and answer after the live has been posted. And I think because of the way the internet is right now, the internet is just being so stretched, I think it is best for us to go ahead and continue to record, post, and offer some questions in the recording that we can engage together in the feed after the video is posted. Also, you can ask questions and give comments and thoughts through the overview from our Bible Project videos. But I would love for a conversation to grow out of the posts that we're posting on our FUMC Facebook page. The videos from Genesis all the way through to now are still on the Facebook feed. And so you can go and find those, and anytime you add a comment to it, it will alert those who have been connected that a comment has been made. So I encourage you to go back and visit those posts. Ask questions. If you've had this time to think things over, go ahead and ask the questions so that we can continue to engage through these books, especially when we begin to see how these books of God's holy word interconnect together. So tonight, in our 66 books in 66 days, we are finding ourselves on night 10, number 10, which means if I do the math, we have 56 nights to go after this posting tonight. And we are in 2 Samuel. We are starting 2 Samuel. But I want to take a step backwards to the latter parts of 1 Samuel, with Saul was chasing down David, but at the same time, Saul was having some difficult times. David destroys the Amalekites, and Saul takes his life. I think a lot of times we don't remember that Saul ended up taking his own life. And it says in chapter 31, beginning in verse 31, "Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, 'Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me.' But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. When the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them." And so there was some deep struggling going on here. Saul's death was also the death of an idea. Israel could no longer believe that having a king like the other nations would solve all their troubles. Guess who did know that? God knew that. And so that's where we find ourselves as we get into 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel is the 10th book of the Bible. And it starts out with David becoming king over Judah, and he hears of Saul's death. And so the purposes, there's several purposes of the book of 2 Samuel: to record the history of David's reign, to demonstrate effective leadership under God. Note that. Effective leadership is really effective to the righteousness if we are effectively following God and letting God be our leader. And also to reveal that one person can make a difference. One person can make a difference and make a change in the outcome of a bigger situation. To show the personal qualities that please God, and to depict David as an ideal leader of an imperfect kingdom, which really foreshadows Christ, who will be the ideal leader of a new and perfect kingdom, which if you go to 2 Samuel chapter 7, you start getting glimpses of the Messiah to come, the Savior, the King to come, that will lead the people into a perfect kingdom. The key verse that comes out of 2 Samuel comes from 2 Samuel 5, verse 12. And David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. This book was named after the prophet who anointed David and guided him in his time of living for God as king. And so the book of 2 Samuel is broken out into two main sessions. First, it is David's success, and the second is David's struggle. So David, just like Saul, starts out as an amazing king, a great warrior, a great military leader. He had all these successes in chapter 1 through chapter 10. David becomes the king of Judah. David also becomes the king of Israel. And David conquers the surrounding nations. David took a fractured kingdom that Saul had left behind and built a strong, united power. 40 years later, David would turn his kingdom over to his son Solomon. David had a heart for God. He was a king who governed God's people by God's principles, and God blessed him greatly. But along the way, David, as great as he was a human with human flaws. And so you get into chapters 11 through the end of 2 Samuel into chapter 24, where you see sin starting to rise up and the consequences of sin like dropping a pebble in a pond, and you have the ripple effect of the sin that comes out of that. And so you have the story of David and Bathsheba. You know, David sinned with Bathsheba, and then he tried to cover his sin by having her husband killed. And although he was forgiven for his sin, the consequences remained. He experienced trouble and distress both with his family and with his nation because of one bad decision he made. So, David and Bathsheba, we come into the turmoil that arises in David's family. We find that begins to lead to a national rebellion against David because his family, his sons, are against him. And then the final part of 2 Samuel begins to talk about the later years of David's rule. And so the themes that rise up in the entire book of 2 Samuel are about kingdom growth, the rising of the kingdom, and personal greatness. Under David's leadership, Israel's kingdom grew rapidly. With the growth came many changes, from tribal independence to centralized government, from the leadership of judges to a monarchy, from decentralized worship to worship at Jerusalem. And in this too, the personal greatness that rises, David's popularity and his influence increased greatly. More the reason for him to continue to follow after God and to have a check on his temptations and his sin life. He realized that the Lord was behind his successes because he wanted to pour out his kindness over Israel. David knew that God was using him. Just like today, we can feel by the call of God upon our lives, by the power of the Holy Spirit, that God is using us. God is behind our successes. God is the God of blessings. But David regarded God's interests as more important than his own. And I think that we need to do that. God's interests, God's plan, God's purpose are more important than our own. And so sometimes we have to set aside our personal greatness, even though we are popular, even though we have a fan following. Sometimes, many times, we must remember that everything that we do for the glory of God is just that, for the purposes of God, for God to shine through everything that we do. That's really what mission and ministry is all about, remembering that we have one purpose, to lift up the glory of God. Another theme that rises out of 2 Solomon is justice. King David showed justice. He showed mercy and fairness to Saul's family, even though Saul was chasing after him. He showed mercy to his enemies at times, rebels and allies and close friends alike. His just rule was grounded in his faith and the knowledge of God. But David was human. David abandoned his purpose as a leader and a king in a time of war, and his desire for prosperity and ease led him from triumph to trouble and the consequence of sin. Because David committed adultery, breaking one of the main 10 commandments that God gave out, he committed adultery with Bathsheba, and because of this, he experienced consequences of sin that destroyed both his family and his nation. And then there's this thought that comes out of one of the themes through 2 Samuel, the phrase, feet of clay. David not only sinned with Bathsheba, but he murdered an innocent man. He neglected in all this process to discipline his sons when they got involved in sin, such as rape and murder. You see, this great hero showed a lack of character in many avenues of his life, and in some of the most important personal decisions that he could have made, he chose really the wrong way and disobeyed God. And the man of iron, David, with this great character, the apple of God's eye, had feet of clay. He didn't move in the right direction when he knew that he needed to move. The bottom line for us in this is that sin should never be considered as a mere weakness or a flaw. Sin is fatal, and it must be eradicated from our lives. David's life teaches us to have compassion for all people, including those whose sinful nature leads them into sinful acts. David was one himself, and he needed someone to stand up with him and say, hey, you've done wrong. That's why it's good for leaders to have great advisors who are guided by the wisdom of God. David needed a person like that. David needed Nathan. And so here's what I want us to do tonight. I'm going to ask you about a handful of people and find out from you who you think was the most important in David's life to guide him out of his sin nature and into a time of right wayness. And think of, too, those people in your life who hold you accountable. You know, in the Methodist Church, we have this understanding of the importance of accountability, coming together in small group relationships, checking in with one another and saying, how is it with your soul? So that when we near that time of temptation, crossing over the line of temptation, we find ourselves able to have victory over that temptation and the one who is tempting us, because we know we have victory in Jesus Christ. So the key people that come out of this book, of course, is David and Bathsheba, but Nathan and Absalom. I want you to look at those key people, and I want you to think of how David's life would have been different without those key individuals and how his life was made better with some of those key individuals. Have fun studying tonight. Let's get together on the feed for some question and answers, not only tonight, but throughout the coming days. And if you feel the need, the desire, the want to go back to Genesis and look at those videos again, Maybe they'll raise up new questions for you as we are just here doing an overview, but also we can begin having further discussion in any one of these books that we've already done. Night number 10, 56 to go. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And as always, thank you for joining. We'll see you soon, friends. Bye for now.